I heard an interesting Torah on Shabbos from the rabbi in Beis Menachem here, Rabbi Marlow. So he says, I can't remember who he quoted. I think he said in the name of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rabbi Yaakov Emden said that if you look in the Gemara in Baba Basra, Daf Memvav 46, so there, when often the Gemara will use a mnemonic in order to remember different cases that are going to be taught. So if there's like 3 or 4 cases going to be taught one after the other, right, then it'll give you a certain, letters to remember as a mnemonic for these upcoming cases. So in Baba Basra, one of the mnemonics is Amalek, Ayin Mem Lamed Kuf, to represent the different cases that are going to be discussed in the Gemara. So Rabbi Yaakov Emden asked, what's going on over here? We're supposed to wipe out Amalek. What's this idea of the Gemara itself using Amalek as a mnemonic to remember Rosh Hashanah, to remember the cases of the Gemara? So he answers that on the contrary, when you have somebody like Amalek, the only way to deal with him is to bring him to the Beis HaMedrash. Bring him to the Beis HaMedrash to learn the Torah, and over there he doesn't stand a chance. It's only out on the street, on his battlefield, on his turf, so to speak, that he has a chance. But if we bring him into the Beis HaMedrash, then he doesn't have a chance. So the best way to wipe out Amalek is through the learning of Torah.
He doesn't have a chance to win.
That's right. He doesn't have a chance to win. Doesn't have a chance to win because it says about the Yitzhak. Barasi Yitzhahara, Barasi la Torah Tavlin. I created a spice of Torah to help with the Yitzhahara, because the truth of the matter is, there's an interesting halacha when it comes to Amalek, when it comes to Edom, right? Amalek comes from Edom. When it comes to Edom, then you're not supposed to allow them in for 3 generations. They're not allowed to come to the Kal Hashem. But Amalek, it says, if a Amalekite comes and wants to convert, you accept him straight away. You accept him in straight away. So we see that Amalek is able to be transformed. And in fact, the Gemara says that the grandchildren of Haman were teaching children Torah in Bnei Brak. So there you have it. So, all right. We are holding Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. However, because it's always good to start with a story, let's just go back to the bottom of Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, which starts with Tonon Rabbanon, which is a story about how Hananiah ben Chizkiah saves the book of Yecheskel for the second time. Okay, so that's where we're going to start from. Again, it's Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph at the bottom of the page. If you're using an art scroll, it's 13a6, Tonon Rabbanon, 3 lines from the bottom of the page in the Gemara. Give everybody a minute to find it. Tonon Rabbanon.
Okay.
Yep.
And where is it again?
It's Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph 13a at the bottom of the page. The last 3 lines. Tonon Rabbanon Maisa B'Tinuk. Okay. So the Gemara says, the Holy Gemara says, Tonon Rabbanon, the rabbis told in the Brisa, Maisa B'Tinuk Echad, there was a story with one child, the base rabbi, the Sefer Yecheskel, he was reading from the Sefer Yecheskel in the school or in the house of his teacher, and because he was such a smart child, he was able to contemplate about the meaning of Chashmal. And as Rashi says, it means that he was able to contemplate on it so that he was able to then expound upon it, right? And what happened as a result of this? And a fire came out from Chashmal and burned him. Either that means literally, or it means that it negatively affected him. And as a result of this calamity, what happened to this child? So the Chachamim wanted to conceal the book of Yecheskel, because they don't want it to bring any further damage to people. Hanani ben Chizkiah said to them, if this child was a prodigy, in other words, just because you have one child who was a prodigy, or the old prodigies. We don't have to worry that this is going to happen to everybody. This is what we call a freak accident. It happens only very rarely, and therefore, not for that is it worth it to hide the book of Yecheskel. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the verses that we were reading from Yecheskel, and we spoke about something called Chashmal, and we want to know, my Chashmal, what is Chashmal? What's the meaning of the word Chashmal? Amar Rav Yehuda, so Rav Yehuda says, and here we turn over to Yud Gimel Amud Beis, 13b, Chashmal, he says, is Chayos, Eish, Memalalos, the Chayos that are speaking fire. So it's three words, Chayos, that refers to the angels, Eish, Memalalos, they speak fire. In other words, when they're speaking, fire comes out. Now, that is one way to understand the word chashmal. Another way to understand chashmal, says the Gemara, but masnisatana, it was taught in a brayso that the reason why these are called chashmal is because itim koshes. There are times when that it's silent, and itim memalalos. But there are times that they speak. When do they speak and when are they quiet? So the Gemara says, when Hashem is speaking, then they're quiet. But when there's no speech coming out from the mouth of Hashem, so to speak, then they speak. There's the Gemara. The Psukim in Yecheskel continue, and it says, the Chayis run to and forth like the appearance of the Bazak. So first the Gemara wants to know, my Rotzu V'shuv. What is this idea? What does it mean that the Rotzu V'shuv, that the Chayis are running backwards and forward? What's going on? Amar Rav Yehuda, so Rav Yehuda explains that what it means is, this is similar to the flame that comes out of the opening of a furnace, that it jumps out and jumps back in. That's exactly what's happening with these angels. They're jumping out and they're jumping back in. What does it mean? Like the appearance of the Bazak. So the Gemara explains what it means. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina says what this means is it's like the flame that comes out from between the shards of an earthenware utensil. So that once you have these broken pieces, so you have things like the fire that shoots out from underneath it and jumps back in. Going back, it says at the beginning of the parak of Yecheskel, it says something about the north, and we're going to see that. Yes,
I'm sorry. On the last line,
yeah,
I don't understand what the last line means when they say an additional meaning ascribed to the word bazak, and then they say is shreds of earthware. Bazak is not shreds of earthware. The bazak shows up through the shreds of earthware.
That's correct.
So, that line is not written right, is it?
So the way Rashi explains it, if you look on the left, Mibein hacharosim, he says it's the way of people who make this gold, right? They refine the gold.
I understand that.
Right. So you're saying that
bazak is not earthware.
Mm-hmm. So if you look at the end of Rashi, right, what he says over here is V'lahav yoytze l'mayla derech nikvei hakli. There's the flame that comes out through the opening, the holes of this vessel. V'hu, and I'm assuming that refers to the actual shard. Asu gvanim gvanim. It changes colors. It comes all of a sudden. The shard itself, perhaps. Turns into different colors. And while these things are constantly going through.
But it's just flashes. It's not earthware.
Right. But the
can I have a clarification? Because we're studying Art Scroll. We're studying Art Scroll, and it says the shards. Bazak is the definition of shards.
That's
Okay,
correct.
and that again, shards of an earthenware utensil. Okay,
That's
so
correct.
to me, so what you said is that bazak is shards, not earthenware. Ben can interpret it the way he wants, but in the book, they're
I'm not
interpreting
interpreting
bazak
it, no.
shards.
Right. No, but the question.
Well, that's what you're telling
No,
us.
the
No, the
rabbi got
question-
it right.
The question here is, right? If you're talking to me about the flames, it doesn't make sense to call the flames bazak if bazak means shards, okay? But the answer, I think, based on Rashi, is we're saying kamare habazak, like the appearance of the bazak, which means that the bazak itself, the shard itself, produces a change in the color of the flames. You understand? So that's why it's being called Mari HaBazak, the appearance that is produced by the bazak, the change that happens in the flame, right? The different colors that come out because of the bazak. But you're right, the lahav itself is not bazak. The bazak itself is the shards. Okay.
Okay.
Going back to the Gemara. It says in the pasuk in the beginning of Yecheskel, it says over there, "Ve'erev I saw, ve'hinei ruach sa'ara." There was a stormy wind, ba'am min hatzofin. It was coming from the north. Anan gadol ve'esh mislakachas, a great cloud with flashing fire, v'noiga loi saviv, and a brilliance surrounding it. Umitoicha, and from its midst, ke'ena chashma mitoicha eish, like the color of chashmal from the midst of the fire. So now the question is like this. Lahechan ozal, where did it go? In other words, you have the fire coming from the north, right? And it seems to be going somewhere. Where is it going? Where's this fire going? So it was very interesting explanation. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, you want to know where it's going? I'll tell you. It was going to conquer the entire world, that they should all be under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, Harasha. Why? Why was it so necessary? Why do you need to have the whole world being underneath the rule of Nebuchadnezzar? Says the Gemara, so that the nations of the world shouldn't say Biad Ummah, in the hand of a nation, Shvala, which is lowly. In other words, they're a weak, lowly, not respected nation. Masa Kadosh Baruch Hu Banav, Hashem delivered his children. So in other words, Hashem first has to prop up the enemies of the Jewish people, so that when the Jewish people are going to be punished and fall into the hands of these enemies, the whole world will say, well, at least they weren't conquered by lowly, people who have no repute or no respect. So the Gemara says that as a result of this, Hashem had a complaint towards the Jewish people. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says, "Mi goramli, who caused me who caused me to be an assistance to idol worshippers?" In other words, who's the one that caused me to go and work on behalf of Nebuchadnezzar and his people to make them the rulers of the world? You know who it was? It was Avenisem Shal Yisrael. It was the sins of the Jewish people. Hen Gormali. They caused me to first have to go and serve the ends of Nebuchadnezzar, so that he could be built up, so that I could use him to punish the Jewish people. Okay? Says the Gemara, and then I saw the chayos, v'hinei oifan echod ba'oretz eitz alachayos. Now, oifan really is the name of an angel, of the angels, of a group of angels, oifanim, right? We talk about them in davening. However, as I mentioned, the Gemara mentioned before that the oifanim in the book of Yecheskel can also be known as a wheel. So what's the idea of a wheel? The idea of a wheel is its foot, the bottom of it is touching the floor, while the head of it is not touching the floor. So the same thing, when Yecheskel describes that he saw a chayas, and he saw then there among them oifan echad, one oifan, which was on the earth, right? But at the same time, he was with the chayas. Amar Rebbe Elazar said, explaining this, that malach echad, you have this one particular angel, shuhu oimid ba'aretz, he stands on the ground, and yet his head reaches into the heavens until it's with the chayas. Okay. A related brisa, the Masnisa Tana, it was taught in a brisa that this malach that we're speaking of, this oifan echad, Sandalfoin, his name is Sandalfoin. He's an angel. He's taller than his colleagues, a journey of 500 years. And he stands behind the Merkava, the chariot. And he weaves crowns for his master. Now, what does it mean he weaves crowns from his master? So if you look in Tosfos, a very short Tosfos on the right, it says, from the prayers of the righteous, he makes these crowns. He weaves these crowns from the Baruch Hu and the Amen Yehei Rabbah and the Kedusha of the Tzaddikim. That's what he makes crowns for Hashem. The Gemara, it sounds like these angels know exactly where Hashem is, and that they're taking the tefillahs of the tzaddikim and they're making crowns, and then they're placing it, so to speak, on the head of Hashem. The Gemara, Aini, is this indeed so? Is it true that he makes crowns and he puts them on Hashem's head? The Gemara doesn't it say in the verse that the angels, when they are praising Hashem, they say, "Blessed is the glory of Hashem from His place." What does it mean from His place? Miklal. What's implied from this is the Mekoimai, His place. Leka diyada. They don't know it. Leka diyada. They don't know where His place is, and so therefore, how can you say that there's an angel in heaven who's taking the tefillos of the tzaddik, the praise of the tzaddikim, making them into crowns and putting them on the head of Hashem, so to speak, when they don't know where the place of Hashem is? How could it be? Says the Gemara answers, the Omar Shei, he would pronounce a name of Hashem, and we know that by pronouncing Hashem in the correct way, it has certain powers. Atago, and he would pronounce it over on the crown. And the crown, on its own accord, would, so to speak, float and find its way to Hashem. In other words, it's true. There's no contradiction. The Malachim themselves don't know where Hashem is. He's beyond them. However, by pronouncing Hashem over the crown would then itself go and sit on Hashem's head. Now, obviously, this is all allegorical. Hashem doesn't have a head, and Hashem doesn't have a crown on his head. But what it means is that that Hashem makes room. This is what Rabbeinu Hananel explains on the side, that Hashem makes room for the tefillahs of the tzaddikim. And this guy named Sandalfoin, this angel, would take these things, and it would, so to, when they would say Kesa Yitnu L'cha, right? When we say the Kedusha, that those things would go up and go to a certain place in Shamayim. But obviously, Hashem does not have a guf, and He doesn't have even the semblance of a guf at all. That's what Rabbeinu Hananel says. Okay. Now we're going to contrast what Yecheskel saw with what's described in the book of Yeshayahu. Both Yeshayahu and Yecheskel had this vision. In Yeshaya, it's in chapter 6. And in Yecheskel, it's in chapter 1. But when you look at the descriptions, it seems that Yecheskel describes it with much more detail, and Yeshaya, it is with much less detail. And we want to understand why the discrepancy. Why is it so?
Rabbi?
Yes.
I don't see any contradiction. I mean, here, from what you were reading from Tosfot, this crown that's being created is created from letters of the tefillot of the tzaddikim.
Yeah.
So it's not a physical crown per se.
Correct.
It's just a set of letters that forms into a crown.
Okay.
And so it doesn't have to sit on anything, a head, a physical head. It just goes and it forms with a set of letters around Hashem's quote unquote head.
Right, but if you read in the Gemara, it says Da'ama Shem Ataga. He pronounces a name over the crown, V'ozal v'yosef bereisha, and it goes and it sits upon his head. Now, if you just read that and take it and read it literally, it doesn't sit right. What do you mean Hashem has a head, and what does it mean that the crown sits on a head? And it's the point I was just making is to emphasize that it's all allegorical.
But I don't see the problem. Okay. Yeah, Mordecai has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess it would be also similar to like in the beginning of Kedusha of Musaf, we say Kesser Nulecha.
That's what he said.
Okay, where that's also allegorical.
Right. Absolutely. You know what? One second. In Rabbeinu Hananel, if you look on the right, it's about 1/3 down. It says Kvapirshu bepirush mashbiyoi v'ozil v'yosef b'makim shecholak lo hakadosh baruch hu lo yeshiv sham v'chalila sheyesh sham padachas kol ika v'roish v'guf kederech haburim el lekava malchusay kederech shemaskirin b'chol yom Yisrael b'tfilosam kesa yitnu l'cho hamoinei chulu. So he says, he basically says that the thing that I was trying to warn against, that this idea that of course there's no physical place there where Hashem where they're creating crowds, but what Hashem does is there's, so to speak, a space where Hashem accepts that the tzaddikim and the rest of the Jewish people are accepting upon themselves his kingship, and so therefore it's symbolic when you talk about crowning somebody as your king to be sovereign over you, right? This is what our tefillahs are doing for Hashem. We're crowning him as being sovereign. It's not, anyway, so I guess for some it's just not even a question that was self-understood. That's okay. Let's go a little bit further. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava says, Kol shara Yecheskel, everything that Yecheskel saw, Ra Yeshaya also saw it. So if so, the implicit question is, how come Yecheskel has to give us more details than Yeshaya gives us? So the Gemara tells us, Lama Yecheskel Daima. What is Yecheskel compared to? Leven Kfa Sheroes HaMelech. He's compared to a villager who saw the king. What does that mean? A villager isn't somebody who is used to seeing the king at all. And so therefore, when he sees the king, he wants to describe it in all its detail. And he's enamored and he's shocked by everything he sees, and he reports all of it. Well, what is Yeshai compared to? Leven Krach, to somebody who dwells in the city, Sheroes HaMelech, who saw the king. Now, there are different ways to understand this. One way to understand this is that if you look in Tosfos' explanation is that shetzarich lo lahavi simonim la'acherim kodim she'aminu. If you go to a villagers and you tell them you saw the king, they're not going to believe you until you give them all the details, right? Because you saw him in a place where he isn't usually. In other words, where was Yecheskel? Yecheskel was in Bavel, right? It says he was al Nahar Kvar when he saw this. So when you tell people, I had a vision of Hashem, people aren't going to believe you because it's not ordinary for Hashem to come and give you a vision in a place like Bavel. That's like considered to be like a kfar, right? And therefore it's not his manner and it's not his way to appear and to show himself over there. And so here too we see that this is exactly what Yecheskel says. He saw him on the Har Kvar. That's why those who heard him were all confounded. Whereas where was Yeshayahu? Yeshayahu was in Eretz Yisrael in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and so therefore, when he spoke about his revelation, nobody was shocked, and therefore he didn't have to go into great detail to explain it. Another explanation that's given is that there's this principle of the Malchus de Ara ke'ein Malchus de Rakia. When you have a kingdom down here, right, it is reflective of the kingdom above, and so because you had the Malchei Yisrael in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, so therefore it was something that Yeshayahu didn't need to go into great detail to explain, whereas in the time of them being taken down into exile, he needed to explain it in more detail. Anyway, be that as it may. Yes.
Question. Again, it may be my ignorance, but in the footnotes that we read, it says the Ramban suggests that Ezekiel, who lived 200 years after Isaiah, may not simply have reached the predecessor's level of prophecy. So I guess the question is, how can he question his predecessor if he lived 200 years after him? I don't understand how that can be something that can be substantiated. That is just part of the argumentation.
No, he's not. They're not questioning each other. It's just they're describing in more or less detail. Yeshayahu describes it in less detail, and Yecheskel describes it in more detail. So the first initial knee-jerk reaction would be, obviously Yecheskel was on a higher level than Yeshayahu, and he saw more. But the Gemara, the Gemara is clarifying, no, Yeshaya was on a higher level, but therefore didn't need to describe more because some of that was just taken for granted, and therefore there was no need to discuss it. No need to mention it. You know, some things, when you're speaking to an audience that know exactly what you're talking about, you can speak in bullet points, right? You can speak in brief, right? You can use shorthand. But when you're talking to people who wouldn't necessarily know what you're talking about, you have to go and explain it in detail so that they can follow along. Yecheskel was dealing with a later stage. It was the time of going into exile, and therefore he needed to go into more detail, and that's the explanation of the differences. But we're going to see that there are actual specific discrepancies between their actual vision, what they describe, and we're going to ask how to reconcile that.
Okay,
remember like this. It says in the Gemara that there were more prophets that God sent to the Jewish people than there were people that left Mitzrayim. Okay, that's a lot of prophets, and yet we only have 24 books, right? We only have 24 books of the prophets, and even though some of the books mention some of the other prophets and they don't have their own books, but there are quite a number that aren't even mentioned, right? And what happened to all of those? So the Gemara says that the Chachamim were the ones who determined what was important for us for future generations and what was only applicable for that time. The things that were applicable for future generations, they preserved. However, what's important to understand is when Hashem sent these different prophets to the Jewish people, on the one hand, it could sound like that it's a different God speaking in each book. I mean, when you read the book of Amos and you read the book of Yeshayahu, right, it's not all exactly the same. And the way it's explained is that Hashem sends a prophet from the generation to speak in the language of the generation. In other words, God is an effective communicator, and he wants to communicate in a way that the intended audience should understand what he's trying to say. And so if Yeshayahu spoke in one way, it's because that's the way the generation that he was speaking to would understand his message, and that's what God wanted them to understand. And in the time of Yecheskel, where Hashem had a different message and Yecheskel was it was very tragic. I mean, Yechezkel didn't want to go. He didn't want to be a prophet because, Hashem warned him about all the impending disasters that are going to happen and that are happening to the Jewish people. He didn't want to go, and Hashem forced him to go. But the point here is that Hashem wanted his generation, his audience, to hear a particular message, and that's why it comes across in a certain way. All right. So, Amar Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says as follows. My dichsiv, what does it mean? In other words, before we're going to go into going a little bit further into the verses of Yechezkel, we want to understand something about the four faces that he saw on the Merkava. So this is how we introduce it. Rish Lakish says, my dichsiv, what does it mean when we say in the pasuk? This is in the Shira that they said. The song that they said by the splitting of the sea. It says, Shira la Hashem ki ga'o, I shall sing to Hashem, for he is exalted above the exalted. So we want to know, who are the people that he's exalted over? Or what are the things that he's exalted over? So he says, Shira, we're going to sing a song, Lemisha Miskor al Hagayim, who exalts himself upon the exalted ones. What does that mean? So we're going to refer this back to the Merkava, to the chariot. The Amamar, learned before, Melech Shebechayes Ari. Who's the king of all the beasts? That's the lion. The lions. The lion is the king of all the beasts. Melech Shebehemos Shor, the king of all the livestock. That is the ox. Melech Shebeifos, and who's the king of all the birds? That's the nesher. That's the eagle. Va'adam Miskar Aleim, and man exalts himself over them, over all the animals. And Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem blessed be He, Misgoy al Kulon, He exalts Himself over all of them. Va'al Kol Ha'olam Kuloi, and upon the whole world. And so that is what we read when we speak about the throne of Hashem that is being carried by the chariot, by the Merkava. The Merkava have the king of all these different things. You have the lion, you have the ox, you have the eagle, and then you have the human being, right? These are the ones upon whom Hashem is exalted. Okay. Now we want to understand a seeming contradiction within Yechezkel himself. Sometimes we point out contradictions between two books, but here we're pointing out a contradiction within the descriptions of Yechezkel himself. From an earlier chapter in Yechezkel, the chapter that we're focusing on, chapter 1, and a later chapter, chapter 10. One verse says, "Udemus peneihem penei Adam," that for the likeness of their faces, there was a human face. Upnei Aryeh al Hayamin larbatom, and a lion's face to the right of the four of them. Upnei Shor, and here we have in this verse an ox's face, mehasmol arbaton to the left of the four of them, etc. And then it goes on to speak about the eagle and so on. But then elsewhere in Yechezkel it says uksiv va'arva ponim le'echod. It says later in Yechezkel that each one had four faces. Pnei ha'echad, pnei ha'kruv. The one face was the face of Kruv. Pnei ha'sheni, pnei ha'adam. And the second face was the face of the human. V'ha'shlishi, pnei aryeh. And the third one was the face of a lion. V'haravi, pnei nesher. And the fourth one was the face of an eagle. V'ilu shar le'kechashiv. But when we speak about the ox, this one's not mentioned over here. This one's not counted among the four faces. So it seems to be a blatant contradiction between the two verses. One has the ox, one does not have the ox, and it's replaced by what's called the kruv. So Rish Lakish tells us the answer. Rish Lakish says, Yechezkel bikish olav rachmin. Yechezkel asked for mercy regarding this ox. And he was able to have it transformed into a kruv. What happened? What's the story? He said before him to Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the world, can a prosecutor act as a defender? We know one of the things that the Jewish people sinned with was with the golden calf. And the reason why they chose the calf is because it was one of the faces on the Merkava, and they wanted to replicate it. Now, since the ox remained on the Merkava, and we need the Merkava to go and ask Hashem to have mercy upon us, but at the same time, this ox, which is part of the four, stands as a reminder to the sin of the golden calf. And since it stands as a reminder for the golden calf, it serves, so to speak, as a prosecutor. And how can you have a prosecutor being part of the group that are trying to advocate for us? So what happened was Yecheskel came and asked Hashem not to allow the shor to stay on the Merkava. And what happened as a result was it was transformed to a kruv. What is a kruv? In other words, how does the kruv stand in and help us to beseech mercy from Hashem? This is my kruv, the likeness of a kruv. What is it? Amar Rabbahu says, karavya. It's like a child. That's what kruv comes from the word karavya, because she came Bavel, Kairin Linuka. In Bavel, they call a youth ravya. That's what they call him. So that's what a kruv is, like a child. And the idea is that a child, usually when a child comes in front of an adult, it evokes mercy from the adult. And so too, we're saying that by having a face of a child on the Merkava, we will evoke rachamim from Hashem and not have the shor there. 1 second. That's the case. If you're telling me that kruv means the face of a child, so basically you're talking about two human beings. You have the person and then you have the child. So Amalei Rav Papa la Abaya. So Rav Papa says to Abaya, Elamata, if that's the case, Dichsiv, then what are we going to do with the verse that says Pnei ha'adam kruv, Pnei ha'echad Pnei ha'kruv, or Pnei ha'sheni Pnei ha'adam, that one face is the face of the kruv, and the second face is the face of man, V'hashlishi Pnei aryeh, and the third is the face of a lion, Maravi, and the fourth is Pnei Nesher, is the face of an eagle. If that's the case, then it's not really four faces. Why? Because Hainu Pnei Kruv, Hainu Pnei Adam. It's the same thing. One, the one that is the Kruv and the one is the face of the man, is really two faces of human beings. So why are you calling it? Why are you calling it different, distinct faces? So and for the Gemara says, Aperavreve, Vapezutre. They're not the same thing. One is the face of an adult. That's the face of a man. And the face of the kruv is not the face of a man, but really is the face of a small child. Okay? That is how we resolve the seeming contradiction in the book of Yecheskel. So now we're going to mention and look at something which seems to be at odds between Yecheskel and Yeshayahu. One pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Yeshaya in chapter 6. It says, Sheish knofayim le'echad, that each one of these angels had 6 wings. With 2, it would cover its face. With 2, it would cover its legs. And with 2, it would fly. And then they would call one to another, Kaddish, 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 and so on. Because of echad, and another verse, meaning our chapter that we're dealing with in Yecheskel says that each one had 4 faces and each one had 4 wings. So make up your mind. Did they have 4 wings or did they have 6 wings? Which one is it? So if you look at Tosfos, it's a very short Tosfos, but he makes an interesting observation, and he says, if you look at Kosav Echad Omer Sheish Knofayim, Kosav Echad Omer Arba Knofayim, he says, even though if you look what they're describing in Yeshaya, it talks about the chayis, and in Yecheskel it talks about the srafim. Is that right, or is the other way around? 1 second. Which one is it? Whatever the case is, one of them talks about chayis and one of them talks about srafim. So therefore, seemingly it shouldn't be a contradiction. It's possible that one type of angel has 4 wings and one has 6 wings, and that's not what the Gemara answers. So therefore, Tosfos tells us that Mikol Mokim, nevertheless, Mistaber, it makes sense. Shagam Achayis b'sheish knofayim k'mei asrafim. Okay, so there's the answer. That it's the Chayis which are described in Yecheskel would have had 6 wings, like the Srafim that are mentioned in Yeshayahu. Okay, going back to the Gemara. right? So the question is, why is it that in Yecheskel it only describes them as having 4 wings, and the pasuk in Yeshayahu describes them as having 6? And for the Gemara like kasha, it's not a question. Why? When the Beis Hamikdash was still standing, and there you have the vision of Yeshayahu. So there Yeshaya saw 6 wings. Here is when the Beis Hamikdash is no longer standing, and therefore in his vision he saw that that the wings of the chayas were reduced, so to speak, because they no longer served as a function. When we say that the 2 wings were singing praises, right? We're talking about when the Beis Hamikdash is standing. But when the Beis Hamikdash is no longer standing, the 2 of the wings were no longer had a function. Frag the Gemara. 1 second. If you're telling me that in the time that the Beis Hamikdash is not standing, 2 of the wings were, so to speak, reduced, we want to know, which are the wings that were reduced? Which are the wings that are now redundant? So we have different opinions over here. First opinion. Hananel says in the name of Rav, the which wings? The wings, the ones with which they would utter a song. How do we know this? How do we know that those were the ones that were taken away? It's written over here in Yeshaya, with 2 wings they would fly. Right after it says that one would call to the other Kaddish, Kaddish, Kaddish. So we're associating these 2 wings that they would fly with were also the wings with which they would somehow sing Shira. They would sing praise to Hashem. Now, what is the word that's used about these 2 wings? Yo'ifef, right? The word over there is Yo'ifef. It would fly. And it's written in the book of Mishlei, it says, he saw if a necha boy ve'einenu, you cast, and the word for you cast is hisa'if, which is similar to yo'ifef, your eyes upon it, and it is gone. So since there's this kind of verbal analogy, there's a linkage between the 2 words that are used, this teaches us that when you say that they're no longer there, that the wings were diminished, that they were reduced, which wings are they? They're the same wings with which they would fly and then call out Kaddish, Kaddish, Kaddish. Now, that's the view of who? Reb Chanana, in the name of Rav. What about the Rabbanon? The Rabbanon have
Rabbi,
yes.
I wanted to say, maybe it's the difference between Yeshayahu saw them doing Beit HaMikdash, then they were still flying.
Mm-hmm.
But Yecheskel saw them in Bavel.
Mm-hmm.
So in Bavel, there was no Beit HaMikdash, so they were not flying.
That's exactly what the Gemara is saying. That's exactly what the Gemara says. But and That's exactly right.
Yeah, they didn't need to fly around and sing because there was no Beit HaMikdash.
That's correct. That's what the Gemara saying.
Yeah.
Now, so Rav Chananel in the name of Rav says that the 2 that were missing were the ones that were that would fly and that would sing. Rabbanan Amrei. And the Rabbanan say, no, it wasn't those wings. It was rather Oison Shemachasses Behen Ragleihem. You know which wings they were missing? They were missing the wings that would cover the legs, right? If you remember that in Yeshayahu, when he describes the 6 wings, he describes what each one of the 6 wings did. 2 would cover their face, 2 they would fly with, and 2 would cover their feet. So he says, so the Chachamim, so the Rabbanan said, which ones were taken away from them, which ones Nismatu, which ones were diminished? It was the ones that were covering the legs. Shenema, like it says here, we read this in the chapter of Yecheskel, that Yecheskel describes their legs. V'ragleim regal yeshara. Their legs were a straight leg. Now, v'i lav the imaut. If the wings, right, were not taken away, then they would have been covering the legs, right? Then manoha v'yoda. So how would Yecheskel know that the legs looked the way they did? He was describing straight legs, right? So how would he know what they looked like if they were covered with wings?
I can tell you how he would know. You're going to
steal the thunder. You're going to steal the thunder of the Gemara, but go right ahead.
No. I have a different thing. I think the reason they knew there were legs, how did they know there were faces? They knew there were faces, they knew there were legs, because if they didn't know there were faces and legs, how do they know they covered faces and legs?
So therefore,
Before you say they covered faces and legs, you knew there are faces and legs.
So you have what they call a Gemara cup. You have a good head. This is what the Gemara is going to say. The Gemara is going to use this exactly. The Gemara
I think it's similar. I saw what's written. Yeah.
Right. So, the Gemara says the Gemara 1 second. The Dilma the Igale v'chazile. Maybe the legs were revealed, and that's how he saw them. The Telaite Mahachi. If you're not going to say this, then Udemus Pnei Adam, when Yecheskel describes he says that the likeness of the face was the likeness of a human face, Hachinami di imaut. So maybe you're going to have to say, in other words, if you're using the same logic to say that there couldn't have been wings, because how did he see the legs? Then maybe they clipped off the top wings as well, because it says that he saw their faces, and maybe those were also clipped. Otherwise, how did he see their faces? So obviously, you can't say. So that can't be Ella the igaloi v'chazilei. Rather, you're going. How did he see the face? Because they momentarily opened, and that's how he saw it. Hachinami the igaloi v'chazilei. So here too, they momentarily opened their wings and revealed the legs, and that's how he saw them. So therefore, the logic of the Chachamim, which they're using to prove that it's the wings that cover the legs, is a flawed logic, seemingly. That's the question of the Gemara, right?
Right.
So the Gemara comes along and says that Haki Hashta, can you really compare these two things? No, you can't compare them. Why? When you're talking about the face, it's all fine. Why? Because because it is appropriate and it's a proper etiquette to uncover one's face in front of one's master. In other words, they're standing there before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to remove their wings for a moment to reveal their face, that is still appropriate in front of the king. Right? But kare, when you talk about the legs, lav urcha ara, it's not the way of the world. It's not the proper etiquette legaluya kamirabah to reveal them in front of the master. So therefore, the logic of the Chachamim still stands. That how could he have seen the legs of the malachim if they were covered with wings? And if you're going to say that you wanted it, that they would open it momentarily, that's not appropriate in front of the king. So therefore, what must have happened is they must have lost the two wings that covered their legs. Okay, so that's how we resolve the differences between Yeshayahu and Yecheskel. In the time of Yeshayahu, when there was a Beis Hamikdash, so there they had all 6 wings. It came to the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, there were only 4 wings, and which wings were missing? According to the Chachamim, it was the wings that covered. It was the wings that covered the legs, and according to Rav Hanan el-Bara, in the name of Rav, it was the 2 wings with which they would fly and sing Shira. Now, it's interesting that the Vilna Gaon says that when we talk about these 6 wings, he says that if you look at the verse that we say in the Shema, we say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusay La'olam Va'ed. So Baruch Shem is 2, Kavod Malchusay is 2, La'olam Va'ed is 2. That's 6. So on the 2 top wings, it says Baruch Shem. In the middle wings, it says Kvod Malchusay. And then the last 2 wings, it says La'olam Va'ed. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the 2 middle ones were clipped, which is Kvod Malchusay. And he says that's why in our davening on Yom Tiv, right, on Rosh Hashanah, we say Gale Kvod Malchuscha. What does it mean, Gale Kvod Malchuscha? It's the 2 words that are missing from these Serafim, Kvod Malchuscha, right? Is that we want that to grow back. We want that to be expanded and returned to us. And that's what we're asking Hashem, reveal the glory of your majesty upon us and upon the whole world. Anyway, that's from the Vilna Gaon. Another thing he says is that if you look at the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, right? The Shisha Sidrei Mishnah is an order of 6. You have Zroim, Moed, Nezikim, Kodshim, and Taharis. So the last two, according to the Chachamim, we said that it was the last two that were cut off. That's Kodshim and Taharis. Kodshim and Taharis are not really applicable in the time when there's no Beis Hamikdash. So that's the way the Vilna Gaon explains these differences. Anyway, very interesting. Vaita says the Gemara for a little bit further. Says the Gemara another seeming contradiction between not Yecheskel and Yeshayahu, but rather two other places in the Torah where we talk about angels and we talk about the number of angels that are part of the entourage of Hashem. One pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Daniel. It says, Elif, I think it's Daniel, yeah, in Elif, Daniel had a vision in chapter 7, and over there in the vision it says, Elif alfin yisham shunei, that 1,000 thousands were serving him, and a myriad of myriads, that's 10,000 of 10,000s, were standing before him. Now, although that's a lot, but still there's a limited number. You can times 10,000 times 10,000 and figure out what the number is, right? So there's a limit. But there's another pasuk which comes from the book of Iyov, and another pasuk says, Hayesh misbah legdudov. Is there any number for his legions? In other words, it seems that there's no limit to the amount of angels that he has. So the same answer that we gave to resolve the contradiction between Yecheskel and Yeshaya is used over here. Like Kasha, it's not a question. Kam bisman shebeis hamikdash kayam. When we're speaking the pasuk of Iyov, so there, it's when the Beis Hamikdash is standing, and therefore there's no limit to the number of his entourage. One is talking over here in the book of Daniel, because remember, Daniel was after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, right? So there he says that in the time of when the Beis Hamikdash is no longer standing, is kaviyachol, so to speak, that the members of the heavenly court were reduced. In other words, so to speak, his entourage was lessened as a result of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. That's one way to resolve these two psukim, but there are other ways to resolve it. Tanya, stored in the Brisa, Rabbi Yomer, Rabbi says, Mishum Abba Yesi ben Daisa, in the name of Abba Yesi ben Daisa, that the way we should understand it is as follows. Not that it's a difference between one time period and another time period, but rather, Elef Alfin Yisham Shunei, when it says that thousands of thousands were serving him, that's Mispar Gedud Echad. That's just the number of one legion, because we're speaking about a particular legion that are doing a particular service. But the Ligdudov, Ein Mispar, when you talk about his legions, right, that has absolutely no number, right? It's infinite. Another answer, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Omer, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says, Elef alfin yisham shunei lenahar dinor. 1,000 were serving him. This refers to the angels that were by the stream of fire. Shenema, as it says, again, going back to this pasuk in Daniel, quoting it a little bit more full, it says as follows. The pasuk says, Nahar dinor, noged v'nofik mikadmohi. A stream of fire was flowing from before him, and in that context, it says Elef Alfin Yisham Shunei, that 1,000 were serving him. Veribe Rivavon Kadmohi Yikumun, and a myriad of myriads, like 10,000 of 10,000s, were standing before him. So, when we say that there was a certain number, we're just describing it in this particular context, but in no way are we saying that is the full sum of the angels that Hashem has going before him. Now that we mentioned the beginning of the pasuk in Daniel that speaks about the stream of fire, we want to know, right? You're talking about a stream, where does this stream of fire come from? So the Gemara says, it comes from the sweat of the chayas. What does that mean? It comes from the sweat of chayas. Remember, we said that the chayas are the ones who are carrying the kisei hakavod. So, from carrying the kisei hakavod, because there's so much, so to speak, fire over there, as a result of this intense avodah, there's, so to speak, this sweat that comes from the chai. It's not real sweat, but it's being described as sweat, right? And this is where the Nahar Dinor comes from. Right? The Gemara, right? So where does it go out to? In other words, when you have a flow, a river, a stream going from one place, it has to be exiting somewhere else, right? It goes somewhere else, right? So where would it be emptied? Amar Rav Zutra bar Tovia, Amar Rav Zutra bar Rav Zutra. Son of Tovia said in the name of Rav that it goes al Rosh Rishoyim begehenam. This stream of the Nahar Dinor pours on the head of the wicked in Gehenna. As it says, he brings a pasuk, Shenema, Hine Sa'aras Hashem Chema, Yotza, that behold the storm of Hashem, a fury shall go forth, and a tempest shall seek and tempest shall seek rest. Al Rosh Rishoyim Yochol, it will rest upon the head of the wicked, and this is being used as a verse to support this idea that where does the stream go to? It goes onto the head of the wicked that are in Gehenna. Okay, that is one opinion as to where this stream goes. But there's another opinion. There's another opinion of where this goes, and that is from Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, Al Asher Kumtu, on those who were ordained. What does that mean, on those who were ordained? Shenema, as it says in the pasuk, Asher Kumtu v'loy eis, those who were ordained before their time. Nahar Yitzchok Yisedam, whose foundations was swept away by a river. What's going on? The Gemara is going to explain what's going on. But what he's basically, in a nutshell, is that there were supposed to be many, many generations that were to be created. And although they were ordained to be created, Hashem didn't end up creating them because of the honor of the Torah. We're going to see in the next brisa as this is explained. Tanya was taught in the brisa. Who are these people that Akshe Kumtu? Reb Shimon HaChassid, Reb Shimon HaChassid says, Elu Teisha Meyes V'Shivim V'Arba Deiros. These are the 974 generations Shekumtu Lihibares that were ordained to originally be or created. If you look, Kaidem Shenivra Ilam, before the world was created. Here we went over to Daf Yud Daled Amud Aleph, and if you look in the first Rashi on the page, he explains what's going on. Rashi explains like this: Nigzar Aleim Lihibaris. These wicked people, right? It was decreed upon them that they should be created. Lihiyos, to be Koydem Matan Torah, to be before the giving of the Torah, L'kayim, to fulfill Mashenema, that it says in the that which it says in the pasuk, Dova Tziva, a word he created Le'elef Dor for 1,000 generations. In other words, Ru'uya Hoisa HaTorah, the Torah should have been Lihinosim, been given L'Seif Elef Dor at the end of 1,000 generations. But what happened? Right? In other words, the Torah should have only been given, Matan Torah should have taken place at the end of 1,000 generations. When Hashem saw that the world cannot endure below Torah without Torah, Amad Utrodan, he came and he kind of removed them, and he ended up giving the Torah at the end of only 26 generations, Adam Harishan and Moshe Rabbeinu, from Adam Harishan to Moshe Rabbeinu, which would be 26 generations. So if you take 1,000 generations and you minus the 26, you're left with 974. Those are the 974 that we mentioned over here in the Gemara, that were ordained to be created, but they were all wicked, and it was decided that the world could not continue without Torah, and these wicked people obviously would not have had Torah, would not have learned the Torah, would not have used the Torah, and therefore Hashem removed them and took them away. Now, what did he do with them? Amad HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem went and he proceeded, he took some of these wicked people, and he planted them in every generation. The Hain, and these are as they panim shabadar. They're the brazen-faced people in the generation, and they instead of having this 974 generations of wicked people all confined into the time before Matan Torah, God spread them out throughout the course of history. And that's what then and
Rabbi,
yes.
why are they saying that the 974 that were left were Yoshayim?
Why are they saying that they were Rishayim? I guess obviously Hashem knows things before they happen. Hashem is able to see where what things are going to transpire before they transpire. And sometimes Hashem determines that that's okay, and sometimes he determines it's not okay. So for example, with Yishmael, even though Hashem knew that he was going to turn out to be wicked, nevertheless, it says, Basher Husham, he was judged based on how he was there. The same thing is with with Chanoich. Chanoich, we're told that he was taken early. Why was he taken early? Because it says that he was righteous and pure, but because Hashem saw that he was not going to be able to withstand and he would have gone bad, Hashem took him early. So we see in some situations Hashem knows what's going to happen and allows it to happen, and in other situations He knows that these souls are going to be wicked and decides that the world cannot handle them all being put together in, they tell a joke about
that wasn't my question. Okay, my question is very simple. The Torah was supposed to be given after 1,000 generations. All right, Hashem looked and he saw that there was going to be a problem. The problem could have been with the 26 that were created, not with the 974 that were to come after the fact. So, to say afterwards that he sprinkled in each generation members of the 974, in order to put them back, somehow, may not fit. So my question was, he may not have created them because of the 26, not because the 974 were bad. If you understand my meaning.
I do. However, the challenge you have is when it says that that it's going to rest upon the heads of the wicked, right? And we're saying this was used to get rid of these Rishayim, to withdraw them. Well, why would we be calling them Rishayim? We would be calling the first 26 generations Rishayim. But here we're saying that no, the Rishayim spoken of in the verse refers to the souls of these people of the 974 generations.
Well, my response to that is very simple. I mean, why stop after 26? And the answer is because he saw that within the 26 there were Rishayim, and it was not going to stop, but it was going to continue, perhaps accelerated. So therefore, the Rishayim that existed in the 26 generations that were created was the reason why Hashem stopped. It wasn't the 974 that were going to come afterwards.
Okay, so that's possible. I will look into it further. I'll see if there are any more things written by the Meforshim on this. It's an interesting point that you raise, and Lena and I will follow it up tomorrow. Not tomorrow, yeah, Mr. Shem. Tomorrow's time is Esther, but Mr. Shem, I think there's still going to be a share. But I will look into it for you. So thank you for the question.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Right. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
You too, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Class.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.